The sharp click of metal against glass jolted me awake. A woman's silhouette leaned into my car window, fumbling a large brass key into the lock. She didn't see me watching from the shadows of my porch. The wind paused. My heartbeat didn't. She thought this was just another neighbor she could bully. She didn't know who she was really unlocking. Subscribe before I tell you how everything unraveled in front of the entire neighborhood. Stay with me till the end. It started on a slow Saturday morning. I was home for a few weeks of leave, quiet time with my wife, tending to our small front garden, finally catching up on chores. My car, a black unmarked Dodge Charger, was parked just outside the house, glinting under the morning sun. To anyone in the know, it screamed federal. But to the uninformed, just a regular car with tinted windows. The kind you should leave alone. The neighborhood had changed in my absence. A new HOA president had taken over, a woman named Marla, though everyone had started calling her Karen behind closed doors. She was the clipboard type. Always watching. Always writing. Always interfering. Rumor was she'd pushed out the last HOA team with threats of legal notices and citations over things like mailbox paint and leaf piles. The kind of woman who weaponized bylaws for control. I had barely unpacked when the first letter came. Folded crisp in an envelope taped to my mailbox. Unauthorized vehicle notice, subject to HOA fine. No name. No signature. Just a citation threatening removal of non-compliant transport from shared property. My driveway. I ignored it, naturally. It was my car, on my property. But 2 days later, I caught her staring at it again, this time with a tape measure. I stood on the porch, arms folded. She didn't flinch. Just scribbled something down and walked off. That's when I realized this wasn't about the car. It was about control. And Karen didn't like not having it. My wife told me to let it go. She thrives on reaction, she said. Don't give her one. And for a while, I didn't. Until that night. It was just past midnight. I had stepped out onto the porch to grab something from my truck. That's when I saw her. Karen. In her pink velour tracksuit, crouched by my car door with a keyring in hand, an actual ring of keys, like she was some kind of parking attendant. I stayed quiet, half hidden by the porch shadows. She didn't even check if anyone was watching. She inserted a long brass key into the driver's side. It didn't fit. She tried again. Twisting. Forcing. I watched her mutter something to herself and then step back, frustrated, arms crossed, like the car had offended her dignity. Then she did something worse. She pulled out her phone and dialed. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the posture, the fake distress, the loud gestures. That wasn't a neighbor calling for help. That was a show. A setup. And I knew exactly where it was headed. I stepped back inside and quietly grabbed my ID badge from the kitchen drawer. My wife heard the back door click and whispered, "What's going on?" I just nodded toward the window. "She's calling the police." For me. Sure enough, the red and blue flashes showed up less than 5 minutes later. I walked out before they rang the bell. 2 officers stepped out, hand on holster. Karen was already pointing. "That's him. That's the suspicious man with the vehicle." The officers paused as I raised my hand, then reached slowly into my coat. When my badge came out, everything stopped. The moment my federal badge caught the cruiser's headlights, the energy shifted. Both officers stiffened. Karen, still standing smugly behind them, faltered for the first time that night. Her mouth moved, but no words came out. One of the officers stepped forward cautiously. "Sir, can we speak with you for a moment?" His tone had changed, from suspicion to caution. I nodded slowly, keeping my movements deliberate. My wife stepped out behind me, recording everything silently on her phone. We'd learned long ago, documentation saves lives, even for people like us in uniform. "I'm a Deputy United States Marshal," I said calmly, holding out my credentials for verification. "That vehicle is a federal government asset. Registered to a secure program. Parked legally, on my private property." The officer studied the badge, his brow tightening. "Understood, sir. We didn't know." I nodded. Clearly. I didn't say it with anger. Just disappointment. Behind them, Karen's confidence evaporated. She stepped back, clutching her phone like it was a shield. For someone who made threats all day, she wasn't ready for what real authority looked like when it stared back. One of the officers turned to her. "Ma'am, did you attempt to unlock this vehicle?" Her head jerked. It was abandoned. I was trying to confirm ownership. As HOA president, I have jurisdiction to— Jurisdiction, the officer interrupted, his voice suddenly sharp. Over a vehicle you don't own, on property you don't manage? She tried again. But his car doesn't have HOA decals. That violates Section 8B of our parking regulation. This isn't an HOA parking lot, ma'am, I cut in. This is my federally recorded driveway. And you tried to open a federal vehicle. That's attempted tampering with federal property. The second officer cleared his throat. "Sir, would you like to file a report?" I looked Karen in the eye. She was pale now, trembling, her clipboard visibly shaking in her arms. My instinct wanted to say yes. But I also knew the law well enough to let her hang herself. "Not yet," I replied. "Let's see what the HOA board says about this. If they condone her actions, I'll escalate through federal channels. I'll assume she didn't act alone." Karen's lips parted like she wanted to object, but no words came out. Only a gasp. The officers took a few more notes, gave me their badge numbers, and returned to their vehicle. Karen didn't move. I turned to walk back to the house. My wife followed me in, phone still in hand, face unreadable. Once inside, I sighed deeply and sat down. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I muttered. "But this isn't over. Someone like her doesn't quit just because she got caught." My wife nodded, setting her phone down. "Then we make it official." She turned her laptop toward me. "Time to draft a complaint. And maybe send it to her HOA board. With video." Over the next few days, we prepared a file. Not just one incident, but a pattern. Photos of her notices, taped to my mailbox. Screenshots from the HOA portal showing her escalating fines against other residents. Emails from neighbors describing her tactics, threats, fake legal jargon, manipulation of the bylaws. My wife, who worked in legal analysis for a federal agency, pieced together a damning case. "This isn't about property compliance," she said. "It's about harassment. Patterned, targeted, and escalating." I agreed. We weren't just stopping her for us. We were stopping her for everyone she bullied into silence. Then came the breaking point. A neighbor named Eliza, quiet and elderly, knocked on our door. She looked shaken. I heard what happened with Karen," she said, voice trembling. "She's been harassing me, too. Said if I didn't move my wind chime, she'd file a complaint with the county." "It's just a wind chime." My wife guided her inside. "Did she threaten you in writing?" Eliza nodded and handed over a printed note. Same font. Same aggressive tone. Same clipboard signature. President, HOA Enforcement Division. We added it to the file. Karen had no idea how close her empire was to collapse. We printed everything. Compiled it into a formal dossier. Labeled evidence, testimonials, HOA bylaws, federal violation statutes. My wife, precise as ever, drafted the cover letter like a prosecutor preparing for court. I sent the file to the HOA board anonymously, using an encrypted email server. Within 48 hours, we received confirmation. The board had received a formal ethics complaint and would open an internal investigation. I didn't need to attach my badge this time. The evidence did all the talking. Now it was up to the system she built to decide whether it still protected her. Karen didn't take it well. She stopped her daily walks. Her car sat idle in her driveway. The clipboard vanished. Neighbors started whispering, some thanking us, others afraid to be seen with us. Power like hers doesn't go quietly. But sometimes, exposure is louder than retaliation. The silence from her house became its own kind of apology. A woman who once ruled with passive-aggressive notes and threats now peeked through blinds like a fugitive in her own castle. My wife said it best, justice isn't loud. It's persistent. And ours was only just getting started. A week later, I received a letter in the mail, this time from the HOA board. It wasn't a citation. It was a formal acknowledgement. We appreciate your documentation. Appropriate disciplinary action has been initiated. The individual in question is no longer permitted to act in any official capacity on behalf of the HOA. I smiled. Karen had lost her power. Not through yelling, not through confrontation, but through cold, quiet truth. The kind backed by facts, by law, and by the very system she thought she could twist to her will. She'd tried to unlock my car. We'd unlocked her downfall. Later that night, after the patrol cars had driven off and Karen had vanished behind her HOA fortress, the neighborhood slowly returned to silence. Porch lights clicked off one by one. The cicadas buzzed in their usual thoughtless rhythm, as if none of what had just happened mattered. But to me, it did. My hands were still steady from training, but my mind was catching up to the weight of it. I walked back to my car and stood by it, watching the faint scrape marks on the handle left by her master key. The arrogance, the danger, the blind entitlement. Back inside my home, the air felt dense. My wife poured me a glass of cold water and didn't say a word. She had already known this neighborhood wasn't going to be quiet, not after the last HOA election drama and the half-dozen fines they'd mailed us for non-standard gravel. But this was escalation. I stared at the water, its surface trembling slightly from the hum of our old fridge. She thought she could just open my car like she owned it, I muttered. My wife nodded. They think they're untouchable because they wear clipboards like crowns. I stayed up past midnight reading. Not a novel, not the news, but internal updates from the Marshal's office. There had been prior reports of impersonators. People using fake authority, flashing fake IDs, making real threats. Karen wasn't there yet, but the trajectory wasn't hard to trace. The camera footage I'd pulled from my doorbell and dashcam clearly showed her trying my handle, then calling 911, lying about suspicious behavior. I backed it up twice. Not for revenge. For record. Because in my line of work, silence was never just peace. It was preparation. The next morning, the HOA newsletter arrived, pushed under every door like a threat wearing a smile. The headline read, "Unidentified Suspicious Vehicle Breaches Lakeview Zone 3." They had printed a picture of my car, taken from a security cam I didn't know existed. They'd blurred the plates, but the angle made it obvious it was mine. Below, in fine print, was a note urging all residents to remain vigilant and report suspicious activity. My blood ran cold. This wasn't incompetence anymore. It was targeted framing. They were turning neighbors into informants. Manufacturing paranoia. I dressed in uniform that morning. Not out of pride. Out of necessity. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusted my badge until the reflection caught the gold perfectly. If they wanted to play games of power, let them see real power, not arrogance, not politics, not the hollow bluster of HOA rulebooks, but the actual rule of law. I walked outside, the sunlight sharp and hard against the pavement, every crack in the sidewalk looking more like a fracture line. I got into the same car they'd tried to label a threat, and drove slowly, visibly. At the community center, I parked right in front. No hiding, no second-guessing. As I walked in, heads turned. The new HOA president, Karen's cousin, if the gossip was true, froze mid-step. I handed over a sealed envelope. It contained notice of the legal boundary lines as per county record, proving they had no jurisdiction over my property. It also included a printed copy of the federal statute on impersonating law enforcement, with a post-it on Section 912. "Just some light reading," I said quietly, "since there seems to be some confusion." The meeting dissolved fast after that. People mumbled, papers rustled, chairs scraped back. No one made eye contact. Back outside, I sat on a bench under the flagpole, watching the clouds shift over the lake. For a second, I let myself believe it might be over. But my gut told me otherwise. HOA Karens don't back down from legal warnings, they escalate. And I had seen enough bad decisions in my career to know the moment right before someone crosses the line. She wasn't just going to step over it. She was going to sprint. That evening, a neighbor approached me cautiously, holding a brown envelope. "This was slipped into my mailbox by mistake," she said. Inside was a copy of my property file. Someone had highlighted sections, scribbled questions in the margins, even noted a fence post that was out of alignment. Karen had started building a case. Not a legal one, a social one. Leaking doubts, weaponizing rumors, tilting the board until she could strike cleanly. I thanked the neighbor. She nodded and walked off, clutching her toddler's hand a little tighter than before. I sat on my back porch for a long while, watching the shadows stretch. My badge lay beside me, its weight somehow heavier tonight. They don't care about truth, I thought. They care about control. But truth had a way of burning through the plastic lies. I just had to stay calm, methodical, one step at a time. I wasn't here to flex my title. I was here to protect my family, my peace. And sometimes that meant letting your opponent underestimate you just long enough to catch themselves in their own trap. By the time night fell, I had everything logged. Doorbell footage, newsletter scans, the envelope from the neighbor, my own field report, written clean and precise. I wasn't going to use it yet, but I wanted it ready. Because people like Karen don't stop at your car handle. They come for your fence, your peace, your name. And eventually, they cross the line that can't be uncrossed. My job wasn't to warn her anymore. My job was to wait. Because when the law finally moves, it doesn't knock twice. 2 days passed. No calls. No knocks. No newsletter. Karen had gone silent, and that's what made me nervous. HOA tyrants don't retreat unless they're planning something worse. I reviewed the footage again. Her attempting to open my car. Her calling 911. Her lying to the dispatcher. I had written the report as if it would go to court. Concise, neutral, damning. But I hadn't submitted it yet. Why? Because every instinct told me she would slip further on her own. And she did, just not in the way I expected. Saturday morning, I walked outside to grab my mail and saw it, a notice posted on my property gate. A violation report, citing improper vehicle storage, non-compliance with decorative conformity, and visual disruption. It was printed, sealed, and unsigned, but it was HOA issued. She was trying again, only this time on paper instead of phone calls. I pulled it off, walked back inside, and scanned it into my file. It was official now. She'd made her second move. My next one would be my last. That evening, my wife received a voicemail. Karen had accidentally dialed our landline instead of her HOA committee chair. She thought she'd hung up, but the message was still recording. On it, we heard her laughing with someone else, bragging about baiting the Marshal guy into overreacting, claiming she had friends in code enforcement. It was all on tape. My wife and I listened to it 3 times. There was no more need to wait. We compiled the footage, audio, HOA violation, and my original report, and submitted it directly to the local liaison of the U.S. Attorney's Office. Monday morning, I showed up at the community council meeting. Not in uniform. Not aggressive. Just as a resident, holding a sealed folder. Karen was there, pretending everything was fine, sipping from her HOA-branded mug like she ran the world. When the floor opened to resident concerns, I stood calm, clear. I read out the statute she had violated, played the voicemail, showed the video, and then I ended with, "This isn't a neighborly dispute. This is obstruction, impersonation, and abuse of civil code under the color of authority. The DOJ is now aware. You should be too." The room went silent. Dead silent. Karen's face turned ghost white. She tried to speak but couldn't. The HOA president stammered something about independent investigation protocols, but it was too late. A few residents stood and left quietly. Others turned their chairs away from her. One woman whispered, "I knew something was off." The illusion had cracked. Her power wasn't built on rules. It was built on fear. And fear only works when people don't know the law. But now they did. And she had just learned who she was really dealing with. 2 weeks later, a letter came in the mail. The HOA had voted to suspend Karen indefinitely pending external review. The envelope included an apology letter, thin, typed, and cold, but still official. No one dared confront me anymore. No more citations. No more driveway photos. Just quiet stares and wide drive-arounds when I walked to get my mail. As for Karen, she hadn't been seen at the community center since the meeting. Rumors swirled, but I didn't listen. My job wasn't revenge. It was resolution. And this one was done. But it wasn't just about me. I started getting calls, from neighbors, from nearby communities. Others had similar stories. Same tactics. Same abuse of HOA rules. I helped them draft complaints. Shared statutes. Provided a copy of my report as a template. I never asked for credit. I wasn't building a crusade. I just didn't want anyone else to be afraid of someone who thought a clipboard gave them more power than the Constitution. Entitlement dies hardest when no one pushes back. So I did. Quietly. Legally. Relentlessly. One evening, I stood by my car, the same one she tried to open, and just stared at it. Clean. Untouched. Safe. The neighborhood kids were playing kickball down the street again. No more parents rushing them indoors. No more whispers near my fence. The shadow Karen cast had faded. Maybe not gone forever, but fractured enough to break her spell. That's what real authority does. It doesn't yell. It restores calm. Without needing to be seen. Without needing thanks. The last thing I did, I took that original HOA violation letter, the one she'd taped to my gate, and filed it away. Not in a cabinet. Not in evidence. But in a folder marked simply, Resolved. Because some battles aren't won by force. They're won by patience. By facts. By the quiet power of knowing who you are. And who they aren't. And when people like Karen come knocking again, with keys that don't fit and threats that don't land, they'll find a door they can't open. Because behind it stands someone who doesn't bluff. Someone who serves. Someone who protects. And someone who never forgets.